Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is ScopeSF and today I'm going to be going over a deck tech for what could potentially be the start of Mono Black Persist. And I think I said in a previous video that Mono Black Persist will never work, don't even try it, it's not worth it. But as I was, actually taking a shower, I had a shower thought. Usually these epiphanies come to me when I'm just, I don't know, bored at work or anything like that. But this time I was actually thinking about things and this one just kind of clicked. I actually had an epiphany as to how to make this work. And so threw together a list. It's going to be a rough draft of a list, but the basic ideas that I want to explore are all in here. And so let's go over what we're going to be looking at. The big reason that I said Mono Black Persist would pretty much never work is because you guys know how the Persist combo works. You need a Persist creature, you need a sacrifice outlet, and you need something to fight against the -1/-1 counters that you're going to be getting from Persist. The big reason I firmly believed that Mono Black would never work is because in all of my scavenging, the only one that I believe could, realistically ever work was Mikaeus the Unhallowed. Because what he does is, at the very bottom of his text, he said, other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1, doesn't matter, and have Undying. Undying is kind of the antithesis of Persist, or at least, the other side of the coin. If a creature dies with Persist, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter on it, so it gets a little bit weaker. And then if it dies again, it's gone for good, realistically. If a creature with Undying comes back, it comes back stronger with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if it goes away while it has the +1/+1 counter on it again, it's back in the graveyard, gone for good there. If a creature, as you would expect, has both Persist and Undying, it just comes back. And the -1/-1 counter from the Persist and the +1/+1 counter from Undying kind of cancel each other out, and it's just a standard creature. So Mikaeus giving everything Undying does work, and it also works because Murderous Redcap, Goblin Assassin, Lesser Masticore is just a Masticore, and Putrid Goblin is a zombie goblin. So none of those keywords there are human, so he affects every single one of our Persist creatures. The problem is, first off, there was only, you can only have 4 copies of Mikaeus in the deck if that's what you really wanted. And even then, he has a CMC of 6. Way too slow for Modern. If you're casting a 6 CMC spell in Modern, then it absolutely must be a game-winning card. And sure, you could argue that Mikaeus would be a game-winning card if you have like a Putrid Goblin on the battlefield and an Altered Dimension on the battlefield, and the Putrid Goblin didn't die yet, or hasn't been exiled, and the opponent doesn't have instant speed removal from Altered Dementia, and yada yada yada. Then you can say, yes, Mikaeus is the game-winning card. That's way too conditional. And if you're playing a Modern deck based strictly off of conditionals, it is an inferior Modern deck. That's just the way the Modern metagame works, whether we like it or not. So, I thought, realistically, that you could only have 4 copies of Mikaeus, and that was the end-all, be-all. And there was no other way to fight off the -1/-1 counters from Persist. Then, the epiphany that I had was that Putrid Goblin and Murderous Redcap are both goblins. And, surprise, surprise, Putrid Goblin's a goblin, yeah. The reason that's relevant is because of Metallic Mimic. As Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So this card is very good, very common in tribal decks when you're actually focused on a very specific creature type. So, like, if you're playing an elf deck or a merfolk deck or, whatever, then Metallic Mimic is great. Metallic Mimic, even though it does give +1/+1 counters, because it only gives it to a specific creature type, it realistically doesn't work very well in the other form, or the other colors with Persist, because Kitchen Finks, I forget what that is, but I think it's an oof. OUPHE. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, and I think that's all it is. And then Safehold Elite is an elf something. I forget, but it's not. Either way, you have elf something, and then Lesser Mastercore is, a Mastercore. Again, surprise, surprise. But between Oof, Elf, Mastercore, and whatever else I think Safehold Elite is, none of those keywords have anything in common. So if you do decide to run Metallic Mimic as fighting off your -1/-1 counters, then it must be strictly for the card that you're going to have as your Persist creature. Metallic Mimic here is much better and much more consistent, because instead of just requiring at least one copy of a very specific card, it can go between 8 copies of cards in total. If you put this on the battlefield and name Goblin, and spoiler alert, if you're ever playing this deck, you're never going to name anything other than Goblin ever, so don't bother, don't try. Well, actually, no, that's not true. You could name Mastercore. If you know that you have the Lesser Mastercore and then you draw into the Metallic Mimic, and that's how you're going to go about it, sure, that's fine. But that requires you to have the Lesser Mastercore in hand, or the Metallic Mimic in hand. Realistically, you'd want to play the... Actually, no, I guess you could both play both at the same time. I know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling here. Metallic Mimic would work with Lesser Mastercore, but it's much more consistent and a lot safer if you have a Metallic Mimic on the battlefield before you draw your next Persist creature or know what your next Persist creature is, to just name it as Goblin. So I would say in almost all cases, you're going to be naming Goblin with Metallic Mimic, and that's how you're going to fight off the -1/-1 counters from your Persist creatures. But Chaos still technically works because the 6 CMC is too rough. I only have 2 copies of him in the deck. He's kind of a last-ditch effort. Realistically, you're not going to want to draw him. Realistically, you could probably only go down to 1 Machias, honestly. You're going to have 4 copies of the Metallic Mimic, and another way to specifically get Metallic Mimic, but we'll get into that in a minute. Otherwise, obviously you notice that we're not running our standard Persist creature package that I always so highly praise. That's because the standard Persist package is Selesnya mana. We don't have that luxury in mono black, so we're not going to worry about that. But having another 2 CMC creature with Persist to replace the Safehold Elite, and then still having Murderous Redcap as a option, still both very good, very relevant, no problems there. Otherwise, the Sacrifice Outlet package is still pretty standard. You might notice that we're not running any of the black Sacrifice Outlets that are very prominent in more of a Aristocrat's value style of deck, like your Viscera Seers or Carrion Feeders. That's because Persist combo is already on its own balanced out by the fact that it's a multi-card combo. If you're going to run Persist combo effectively, you want to make sure that you can pull off the deterministic win as quickly as possible, and that's the only way it's really going to be relevant. And I don't know if I ever explained this in a previous video, what I mean by deterministic win is, I have this setup. If you as the other player do nothing to interact with me, I will win. This is not your basic Simic deck where I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes doing my turn and run out the clock, and I probably will win, but I can't prove that I'll win. The big reason I like Persist is because it is a deterministic combo. If I have it and you cannot stop it, I will win. There's no guessing. And with these cards specifically, they are the deterministic cards. These are what I will use to win the game. With Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder, I have to wait a turn. They are not deterministic on the spot, so they're a lot slower. And sure, if I pull off the infinite scrying or repetitive scrying with Viscera Seer, or if I make Carrion Feeder a 48-48, I still have to wait until my next turn to draw the card that I scry from Viscera Seer, and I still have to wait next turn to attack with Carrion Feeder. So, and even then Carrion Feeder can still be blocked, and there's other, combat is combat. So, the traditional black sacrifice outlets don't feel worth it for this mono black deck. You'll see me run pretty much all of the really good ones in my Commander deck. That's because Commander is a singleton format, and I don't have very many options, and I am excruciatingly thankful for the options that I do have to make it work, but this is Modern, not Commander. So, that's pretty much the whole part of the Persist package here. So moving on to the next question of what is the point of playing mono black? I actually really like the idea of mono black because of, your typical one CMC black staples. You have Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize. You have pretty good hand disruption in your hand, which works kind of twofold in this deck, actually, in a way that should work in other decks and probably will work in other decks, but serves more of its strengths here. Because when other decks seem to play your hand disruption removal cards like these two, they try to do it as early as possible on turn one. That will, set up your disruption to slow down your opponent's game plan and make sure that they're not doing what they want to do as efficiently as possible, but it also gives you the information of what their deck is early on, so you have much more time to plan ahead for sideboarding. So that's the early game use of these two cards, and that's what a lot of decks like to do. The mid to late game use of these cards doesn't get talked about enough, and that would be, with this being a combo deck, you want the combo to go off without a hitch, and the best way to guarantee that is, either through counter spells, in case your opponents are trying to, I don't know, but you're not playing blue, so counter spells are pretty much out of the question here. Or we can use this hand disruption as one more last-ditch effort to make sure that the opponent does not have any specific instants or sorceries that could get rid of our combo and kind of mess us all up. Like, let's say, going through our turns, not really playing anything. Turn 4, we'll draw into, either of our Alter Dimension or Blasting Stations. So we'll just play that, pass the turn. And then turn 5, play a land. We have the Putrid Goblin and the Metallic Mimic in hand, but then we also have one last mana for either of these cards. We could look at our opponent's hand and see, do they have any way of stopping us? If yes, we can get rid of it and then go from there. We still have the 4 mana from the rest of our lands to finish out, round out the Persist combo. If they have multiple, we can get rid of one and we know what the other one is. We could just wait for the next disruption spell to get rid of it. Or if they don't have anything and we just take out a random card just because, then we still know we can continue the combo without any problems. So, absolutely fantastic there. Otherwise, Fatal Push is really good for the creatures that they do get out, which still could disrupt our Persist combo plan. I'm specifically thinking about something like the Dothwy Voidwalker, the one that's basically Leyline of the Void on a stick. So, every now and again, a creature is going to show up that might disrupt our plan, or they're just going to have a big creature that might outrace us for, I don't know, whatever reason. Fatal Push, really good for just getting rid of those. There's a reason why this card specifically is a modern staple. Otherwise, last card that I really want to talk about in depth, Profane Tutor. This deck plays, this mono black version of this deck would play a little bit differently from other typical ways of playing Persist, because with other versions of Persist, like, yes, the combo is, opponents can read the combo, they can kind of figure it out, but let's say with Gruul Persist, one of my favorite lines of play is kind of like the gotcha moments, where turn 2 or turn 3, depending on my mana dorks, I'll play a Rhythm of the Wild. And that's all I have other than lands and maybe a dork. You don't really know what to expect with Rhythm of the Wild, because maybe I'm playing it because I don't want my creatures to get countered. And, going in there to, not knowing what I'm up against with my opponent, maybe they run a lot of counter spells as a control deck, and I'm just sick of the control deck, and that's why I'm playing Rhythm of the Wild. That's not the reason, that's just an added bonus. Or maybe I'm playing like much more of a super aggro deck, and you could say technically I am once I get into sideboarding and all that, and I want to give all my creatures haste and just punch them, but that's not why we're playing Rhythm of the Wild. The reason we're playing Rhythm of the Wild is because we can also get the +1/+1 counters from it. So there's a lot that can be going on with Rhythm of the Wild, but it doesn't do anything on its own. It requires other creatures to make that work. Then after that, I would play either Altar of Dementia or Goblin Bombardment, and then one of my 2-mana Persist creatures, and just kind of assemble the combo from there. Assuming I hit the land drop or whatever I need to do. But with that, it's, unless you know specifically what deck I'm playing, which you're probably not going to unless, at least going into game 1, then I can catch you off by surprise with Gruul Persist. Realistically, I can also do it with Mono Green Persist if I play out Renata Call to the Hunt, because maybe I'm just a Mono Green Devotion deck and I'm actually looking to punch face. And in a way, I realistically can if I go down the Ronas plan that I talked about in that deck tech video. But I'm not there to punch face. I'm there to, pull off the Persist combo. And once I get Renata down, if Renata is just kind of left alone on her own, then after that I can go Safehold Elite Blasting Station and just win the game from there. So I feel like there are a lot more surprises with other versions of the deck, because the other pieces kind of do a little bit more other than, Metallic Mimic and Mikaeus. It's pretty obvious that those are just kind of there to give +1/+1 counters to things. And then if I play Sacrifice Outlet, they already know it's a combo deck. And if I play a Persist creature, they know exactly which kind of combo deck. So, like I'm saying, there are less surprises with Mono Black Persist. But with the fact that, there's less surprises, there are going to be less kind of speedy gotcha moments, the Mono Black version is going to be a lot more methodical. It gives you a certain sense of control, which, we already talked about the disruption pieces. And that you're going to be more patient. You're going to be taking your time a little bit more. That's why Profane Tutor is actually really good. It's not a tutor in, well, it is a tutor in the traditional sense. Pretty much what tutors do is they are preparing you for a setup for something. And the really good ones, like Vampiric Tutor, you put those cards on the top of your library, or Demonic Tutor, neither of which are legal in Modern, so I'm not even considering them. But if you're playing Legacy or EDH, then those cards, they speed up the clock real quick because you don't have to wait to cast them, and getting the actual card is basically a next turn thing. So what you end up with those specific tutors is they are a lot quicker, a lot faster. Because we don't need to be a quick and fast deck, we can deal with the downside of suspending Profane Tutor and finding very specific cards off of it. And Profane Tutor is pretty much the big reason why this deck will work. It is essentially going to be copies 5 through 8 of Metallic Mimic. Essentially. You could also use it to get a Putrid Goblin, but again, because you also have Murderous Redcap, you don't necessarily need to get Putrid Goblin. Could also get Altered Dementia or Blasting Station, but because you already have copies of these cards, you don't necessarily need to. Ideally, what you're looking for, I would say, is in an opening hand, is, of course, you get the lands to be able to cast what you need to. Turn 1, you're probably going to go for Hand Disruption. Turn 2... sorry, back up a little bit. You have the mana to cast things. You want, ideally, at least one of each of these pieces. But if you don't exactly draw any of these pieces, you can use a Profane Tutor setup to get the final piece. So, yeah, what you'll be looking at, turn 1, Hand Disruption. Turn 2, let's say you have the Putrid Goblin and the Blasting Station in hand, but you don't have any other combo piece, but you do have Profane Tutor. You'll suspend Profane Tutor, pass turn, that you'll spend your 2 mana, that'll be your turn. Turn 3, untap, land, play Blasting Station. They know you're going to be a combo deck, but they don't know exactly what you're up to from there. Turn 4, cast the Profane Tutor because of the suspend, and then get the Metallic Mimic. You already have the Putrid Goblin in hand, so you know that, in this specific instance, you're going to be using Goblin. So slam them both down. You have Putrid Goblin and Metallic Goblin, and you already have the combo set up there. You can also say the same thing for the reverse. If you have Metallic Mimic and an Altered Dementia, but you don't have any of the Persist creatures, then you can use the Profane Tutor to get up either of these 2 mana Persist creatures. In this case, it doesn't matter which one you go for. It could be either the Putrid Goblin and naming Goblin, or the Lesser Mastercore and naming Mastercore, and assembling the combo from there. So Profane Tutor, you could even say that these are the extra copies of your Persist creatures as well. These could be like your 2 CMC copies of Persist creatures, copies 8 through 12, or sorry, 9 through 12. But realistically, just because of the spread of how many cards are in each category, I would say you're most likely going to be looking for a Metallic Mimic. Just read what you have in your hand, and you'll be perfectly fine. Otherwise, nothing too complicated with the land base. Mono black, so as you would expect, mostly swamps. 4 Castle Locktwains. These can be useful. They add mana. And for the most part, since this is a mono black deck, these are more than likely going to be coming in untapped anyway. So the fact that they come into play untapped. They can add mana. They also have the added benefit of spending 3 mana to draw a card if you absolutely need to. Really beneficial. There's a reason that this card sees a lot of modern play, and I completely understand it. A very good card, totally worth not running. Every single land is a swamp in this type of deck. And then otherwise, I am running 2 copies of Urborg. I don't know why. These are expensive cards, in at least in paper. You don't have to run the Urborgs at all. You could just run 2 more swamps and call it a day. That might even be more beneficial. Since so far there is no reason to interact with having multiple swamps. And the only thing that Urborg would do is turn Castle Locthwain into a swamp. But since it's already an untapped land that can tap for black, that doesn't matter. So Urborg is completely unnecessary. I think the reason that I wanted to throw them in was because they can still have that moment of throwing your opponent off, because if you throw down an Urborg, they're probably expecting like a multicolor Black Devotion deck or some type of Cabal Coffers deck, but it isn't. So just kind of having this to throw your opponents off, I think that's the reason I put it in here. And they're also pretty cheap on MTGO. I think they're like, currently I got these for like $3 a piece or something. So I have them, so I put them in here. You don't need to if you're looking to keep this budget friendly. Machias is already a pretty penny on his own, so, and I don't even think the Metallic Mimics are that cheap either. I think they're also a pretty penny. And Lord knows I don't even want to go into Thoughtseize. So yeah, you don't have to run Urborgs. You can just run swamps. That's fine. Otherwise, as far as sideboard, I have the other 2 copies of Fatal Push and the last copy of Thoughtseize. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing with the sideboard. I don't know anything about black sideboarding. I know that Leyline of the Void is probably good, and I know that I'll probably be running your standard silver bullets, like your Pithing Needles, your Damping Spheres, your Void Mirrors, things like that. But I don't know anything about black sideboarding. That's something I need to kind of teach myself about, and I'll get to that eventually. But for the time being, yeah, this is currently what I have for Mono Black Persist. I think I can manage to make this work. When I do get into actually making more gameplay, I'll be doing more of my Gruul Persist deck. That is currently my favorite iteration of this deck, and that's the one that I actually want to perfect. But I don't really have a problem with trying to get some gameplay in of this to see how this actually goes. So yeah, in light of the theme of going a little bit darker, and in the spirit of the season, happy Halloween, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care.